Hi everyone, welcome to FX PhD. This is the After Effects for Broadcast Design course with Tim Clapham. This is the last class of the term. Feeling a bit sad about that. So, what we're going to do this week is carry on from where we left off and finish the animation. We're going to go back into cinema and bring in a 3D shot, composite that, and then we're going to add a few little extras and prepare the animation for output. So let's get cracking. So I'm just going to scrub through slowly so you can kind of see where we got to. I know that playing the RAM previews kind of with this frame rate tends to miss a few bits out, so I'm just going to do it this way. Okay, and this is where we ended up last week with the no logo line logo drawing itself on. So before we continue in After Effects, what I'm going to do is go into Cinema 4D and just show you the next shot that I've set up, and we'll bring that in and go about transitioning from this into the final shot. So let's just go into Cinema 4D and have a look at that. Actually, just to confuse you all, I've jumped into Illustrator. I thought I'd show you the logo first and then how I've kind of set that up in 3D. So this bottom logo here, excuse me, is the actual font, where I've taken some bits off it that had holes in the middle of the O's and the G and things, but basically this is the kind of thing that I want to reproduce in 3D. Now I'd like to make the extrusion as part of the 3D, so first of all I kind of prepared it like this so that we can use that to extrude. And what I want to do is also have a solid object in the middle. So I'll just show you the file that I've prepared, the Illustrator file that I've used in Cinema. So here it is. It's made up of two parts. On the bottom layer, no logo for the inner part of the letters, and on the top layer, the kind of stroke around the outside. It's all outlines. Also notice where I've positioned it. If I bring the rulers up, you can see that the 0, coordinate of the Illustrator file is around here. That's just so that when I import it, that will be more or less world 0. So I've saved that out as version 8 and imported that into Cinema 4D. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what I've done in 3D. This should translate to most 3D programs pretty well. As you can see here, I've imported the Illustrator file, the splines, and I've kind of renamed them. That's not necessary, it's just the way I do things. I've then put them inside extrude NURBS objects, so however your 3D program works, extrude them in a similar way if you were to do something like this. So we've got the outline, if I just switch that on. Okay, so you can see it's quite deep. And then the inner part, and we can actually select this and we could kind of move it in and out if we wanted to, which could be quite cool as well. The idea I had for this was that the logo would just kind of fall and land on a surface, maybe bounce a little bit and then rest there, and that would be the end shot. So I thought I'd use dynamics for this. Now the thing is, there's kind of a lot of points and quite a complicated shape to use dynamics with. I mean, it would work, but it'd be quite slow, and for the kind of simulation that I was looking for, there's absolutely no need to use such complex shapes. So what I've done is I've kind of used a proxy for it. So if I just unhide this, you can see that there's a big cube here. Let me just select that so you can see it. Okay, and what I've done is I've made the extrude objects children of that cube. Now this cube has a rigid body dynamic tag. So in other 3D programs, you'd set these up as rigid bodies. I've also got a plane object, which is acting as my floor. Let's just pull out so we can see that. Okay, that also has a rigid body tag. The difference between this is that this has got a mass of 0, and what that means in Cinema 4D, if you have a mass of 0 on a rigid body, it means that the dynamic simulation won't affect it, and you can essentially keyframe and move that around, but you can still use it for collision and stuff like that. So I've put all these in a solver object and added gravity, and basically with both of these I've set up collision, which is just box. So it's just based on the bounding box of the object, which is fine. It will just use the outer box of the cube. And then I've set up a camera and I've animated we'll let the dynamics do its work really. So let's just switch to camera view. I'm just going to hide the cube and the plane object. And if you notice, the solver object is actually switched off. That's because I've selected it, and you can choose in dynamics, bake solvers, bake all solvers. That essentially bakes all the objects that are underneath it into keyframes. The reason I've done that is just so I can render it over net without any problems. So I've network rendered the final result. It also plays back quicker and stuff like that. The other thing with baking it is it means you can actually scrub through, which you can't do if it's playing the dynamic simulation. You need to start from the beginning and press play. So if I just press play, so you can see what happens here. You can see the logo drops down, bounces, and then kind of settles. Also, you can see that the camera is kind of animating round at the same time. I've created a floor object and positioned that at the same position as the plane. The only reason I've used a floor is because it's kind of infinitely large and I won't need to worry about seeing any horizons or anything. On this floor object I've added an external compositing tag so that when I export the data into After Effects, the position of that object will come through as a null. So that's all good. I'm just going to switch back to the camera view, press play for you again. Just quickly run through the material setup. Basically they're all just luminance only and they have a kind of Fresnel gradient in them, and that's it. Pretty simple materials for this. The other thing that I've done is in render settings I've enabled ambient occlusion for the scene because I'm going to output an AO pass with this. So there's a render of the scene as it stands at the moment. You can see the ambient occlusion is working quite well to give it a sort of a soft shadow where it's sitting on the floor. So what I've done in the output is I've output the AO pass as one, and then I've switched the floor off, and then I've output just as plain RGB with a straight alpha render. So I only got two outputs for this, and they're the files that I'm going to bring into Cinema. The other thing, into After Effects. The other thing I've done is in render settings, save. Down here you can output the compositing project file. So I've output the After Effects file for this, so I can bring in the camera information and the null for where the floor is. So there we go, that's how I've set that up. So let's close this down, go back to After Effects and look how we can use this in our composition. Okay, so before we import the 3D that we've just had a look at, let's just do the next transition. If you remember from the 3D that I just showed you, we start off right up close to the no logo, right in the middle of the red. So what I'm going to do is zoom the camera into the red here, and at that point now we should be able to cut straight into the 3D. Should make for an interesting transition. So it's going to be easier for me to work with two views at the moment, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to make this quite quick. I'm just going to jump forward sort of 6 or 7 frames. 7. And just simply grab the Z axis of the camera, he says, and pull it in. And let's see where it ends up. Pretty much where we want it. I'm going to select this view and just zoom out slightly. And here I'm going to zoom in just so we can see what we're doing. Okay, just be aware I've actually selected the logo there. I don't really want to be moving that around. Just move in a little bit closer. And basically we want this red to fill the screen. Like so. I'm also going to just select these keys, hold down Command, click just to make them linear. So if I step back now, you can see it zooms into that red. Cool stuff. Pretty simple, but that should help with the transition. So the next thing to do is to bring in the 3D renders and bring in the camera data, stuff like that, that we exported from Cinema 4D. So that's what I'm just going to do. Okay, so I've imported those. Let's just have a quick look what we've got. We've got the no logo below RGBA, which has got an alpha channel, straight alpha, and that's just with the luminant materials. And we also have the occlusion pass, which looks like this. Okay, and finally we have the composition that Cinema 4D creates. We're going to use this. Let's just switch to one view. You can see it automatically brings in the camera, the floor null from the external compositing tag, and then finally the no logo below render. Cool. So I'm just going to rename this and drag it into my comps folder, and then I can get rid of this folder for now, don't need that. And let's get cracking with this next section. So what I want to do is I want to add in kind of some 3D layers in After Effects and have it so that it looks like the 3D logo is actually landing on the After Effects layers. So the first thing to do is obviously add in some 3D layers. Now I'm just going to kind of create some crazy shape layers. Just bring that up first of all. Got the star tool. Just going to create a star, and then I'm going to actually edit the parameters down here in the timeline. So I'm going to have 20 points on my star. I'm going to set the inner radius to 200 and the outer radius to 250. And now I'll just fold up the path information. I'm going to put a stroke on it as well. Okay. So the fill colour for this is going to be red from our swatch you want, and we've got a white stroke around it. You'll have to excuse how garish this is going to be, but it's going to be quite funny, and it should give you an example of how you can kind of take your 3D and make it sit on an After Effects 3D layer, and it will actually should be quite convincing, even though it's going to be very garish, bright coloured stars. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the path and create a green and a blue version. So I'm going to do that and then come back to you. Okay, I've made the first one. It's just duplicated the path and then set the inner radius to 250 and the outer radius to 325 and change the fill colour to be the green. And I'm going to do the same again and create a blue one. And here's the blue star, the inner radius of 325 and outer radius of 410. So that's the basic shape set up. I'm going to repeat this star pattern by scaling it up using the repeater. So first of all I'm going to click in here and add in a repeater, which you can't quite see, it's off the bottom here. Okay, so the repeater at the moment is set to actually move the position of the repetitions, so let's just open that up and have a look. I don't want to move the position of them at all, I just want to scale them up, so I'm going to set the scale to 200. There you go. So now it's repeating those three shapes and scaling them up each time. I've got 3 copies, that should be fine. It's difficult to say until we set this as a 3D layer and it's in the right position, so let's do that now. Just going to check the 3D button. Bring up position and rotation. As you know, the floor null here corresponds to the floor position in 3D, so if we open that up we can see our position values are 0 on X, 500 on Y and 0 on Z. So let's position our shape layer in the same place. Okay, and we just need to adjust the orientation. So hopefully that is in the correct place now. So let's just drag it down below the no logo animation so we can see it. And let's just scrub through, make sure it seems to be matching up okay. That all looks cool. not very convincing that this logo is sitting on there. So the way we can fix that is with our ambient occlusion pass. I'm going to just add that to the comp just above the RGB render. There it is. So if we just F4 and change the composite mode to multiply, you can see that the ambient occlusion pass is multiplied onto the 3D layers as well. So you can see that's a lot more convincing. It actually looks like it's sitting on the After Effects layers. If I just toggle this layer so you can see the difference, it really does help. And if we kind of scrub through, you can see that as it hits, we get the kind of ambient occlusion on contact. So that's looking pretty good. The great thing about that technique, although it's very simple, and you can also do it if you output a shadow pass, is that you can then kind of composite your 3D onto After Effects layers really easily. I mean, it doesn't even have to be an After Effects 3D layer. You could just put a simple 2D layer behind that, and it will look like the logo is sitting on it just because of that ambient occlusion pass. And like I say, you can also do that with a shadow pass, etc. So it could be a piece of video or anything like that, or you could be totally garish and do something like I have. So I'm just going to add a little bit of animation to that shape layer, and then we'll come back to the main comp and see how it sits in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scale up the shape layer and rotate it slightly. So if we fold this down and open up the contents, transform, sorry, what I want to do is use the transform in the actual shape. Jump to the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to set the scale to be 50 and set a key. I'm also going to set a key for rotation. And I'm going to go to the end, set the scale to 200 and the rotation to 45. The other thing I want to do is just select my layer, and I just want to put it along in Y so that it's slightly more framing the logo slightly better. If we just select that layer and press U to show the keys for that, select the last two, F9 to easy into those. So there's a kind of round preview of where we've got to. Not too bad. Now we can go back to our main comp, see how that fits in, and add a few extras in there before we kind of wind up the project. Back in the main comp, if we jump to the next set of keys, which is the point of the transition, we can now trim all the other layers off at this point, like so. And if we just open our comps and drag in the project the comp we were just working on, and just start that there. So frame before is the line logo, and now we pull out of the final no logo 3D shot. I'm just going to extend the comp to 12 seconds. And just come to this kind of here, just to have a quick round preview of that part to make sure it's all working okay. Okay, there's the round preview. Hopefully you can see that at the frame rate that we're grabbing this at. But if not, scrub through. You can see that that matches up perfectly okay. Great stuff. Now that bit's complete, I'm going to go back and just add in a couple of little extras to some previous parts of this animation, and then I'm going to just get it ready for output. Before I do that though, there's one other thing I just want to do to this 3D shot. I'm just going to add a slight vignette to it, just to kind of bring the focus into the centre slightly. Nothing too taxing, so I'm just going to kind of drag on my black solid, choose the ellipse tool, double click this. Now I can invert that mask, press F for feather, and I'll give it a feather of about 200. And lastly, on this layer, just drop the opacity down to 50. So it's quite subtle, but if I switch that on and off, you can notice it is making quite a bit of difference. Cool, so I can close that now. Back in our main comp. If we just fold up the camera for a moment, we don't need to see that, and we jump back here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some detail behind this. Again, I'm going to use shape layers. So F2 to deselect, and now I can come up here, I'm going to choose the star tool again. Slight mistake there. Okay, let's pull this out. There we have our first star. Let's open up the contents for that and have a look at the settings. I'm going to go for 24 points in a radius of 10, outer radius of 200. If we just toggle the mask visibility, you can see what's going on a little bit more. I'm not going to want a stroke on this, so I'm just going to delete the stroke out of here, open up the fill, and I'm going to set this to be red. And as before, at the end, I'm going to duplicate that 3 times and have 3 different stars, one for R, one for G, one for B. I've added in a green star, I've rotated it slightly, and this one's got an outer radius of 250, so it's slightly bigger. And again, I'm going to just duplicate these, drag it down, and do the third star. This one will have a radius of 300. Let's just colour it first, and use the blue. And now if I just rotate this, so it's sitting in between. Cool. So if I tilde the timeline to make it full screen, we can just have a look at the shape layer, how it's set up. Okay, so we've got 3 polystar objects under one shape layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to animate the transformation of this. Let's go back to normal view. We can fold these up for now. So if we just scroll down slightly and select one of these, this is where we want this star layer to start from. So I'm just going to select it and trim it to there. I'm just going to rename it as well, shape stars, and drag that down so it's just above the other shape layers that make up the no logo. The next thing to do is to make it a 3D layer and adjust the position. So if we press P for position, we know that our no logo null is in the right place. So if we go 0, 0, 0, okay, that should be sitting on the front of our no logo, which it is. I actually want it to sit behind, so I'm just going to set the position not the X position, obviously, the Z position, so I'm just going to set that to be 10. Just scrub through and we can see if that matches up. Seems to match up fine. Now, because the no logo, this blocky one, has the echo effect, it's set to screen or add, I'm not quite sure, I can't remember, but you can see the stars coming through, which is pretty distracting. We don't want that to be like that. So to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a kind of black solid with a nice big feather on it in between. Before I do that, I'm just going to set up a few keys for this. So I press I to go to the beginning. I want to see scale and rotation, and also opacity. I'm going to set the scale to be 5 at the beginning and add a keyframe. I'm going to also add a key for rotation on Z. Go to the out point that I want, trim that layer to there, and here I'm going to set the scale to be 200 and the Z rotation to be 45. So if we scrub through, you can see now the kind of stars scale up and rotate and as it zooms in. As I said before, I want to fix this ugly part where you can see the stars through the logo, so let's crack on and do that part now. Pretty simple. I'm going to add a black solid. Let's first of all just trim that to the right place. Okay, make it 3D. Let's have a look at the position for this. 0, 0, minus 10, 10. Okay, so that's positioned it behind. If we toggle that on and off, we can see it's hiding our stars quite nicely. I'm just going to add a mask to that and feather it. So I press F for feather, set this to say 150, and then I'm just going to scale this mask so it just sort of sits behind the no logo. Something like so. So if we just have a look at that around there, you can see that it's not showing through the stars. The black solid's doing its job. Probably cause us a problem here. So what I want to do is just fade that up. So I'm just going to jump to the end point of that and set some keys for opacity. Press T for opacity, set that to 0, add a key, jump forward 10 frames, set that to be 100. And ease into that last frame. So you can see there's a slight problem with the star thing showing already. So I'm going to do the same for this and actually animate the opacity of this. So if we just go to the key where the black is 100%, set the shape stars to be 0, jump forward another 10, and set that to be 100 and ease into that. And there we go. Maybe that could come in slightly earlier, but I'll leave that for you guys to adjust if you want to. And there's a RAM preview of that section. It's only a small addition, but I think it helps quite a bit. Cool, so let's move on and one more change and then we're ready to output the animation. So for the final effect, what I wanted to do was kind of repeat this. It's almost like chromatic aberration, or where the channels are all offset from each other and you've got this mixing of colours. I think that's quite cool. Now there's a way to do this with an effect using 3D glasses. You know, if you go to the cinema and you see the 3D films where you have the red and the blue, or the red and the green glasses, well, After Effects actually has an effect so you can do that in here. But it's quite good to use just to kind of create this sort of, like I say, the kind of almost chromatic aberration or the splitting of channels. The only thing with the 3D glasses effect though is you need to have your layers to reference. Now in this scene we've got quite a few different layers. For instance, there's 3 layers just for this. So we'd need to either pre-compose this or kind of do it in another comp. Now I'm going to take this into a new comp to prepare it for output, so I'm going to just add that effect in there. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take the main logo, drag it on to create a new comp and rename that. So I've renamed it output. I'm going to scrub through to the point where I want to add that effect, which is just around here before this, the classic no logo settles into place. So we go effect, perspective, 3D glasses. With this effect up, we need to select our source for each side. Now if you're actually doing some 3D or you'd shot it with a special camera, you'd have a left view and a right view. We're just going to use the same for each, and that's the only layer in this comp anyway, so that's pretty simple to decide what to do. For the 3D view we have quite a few different options in here, depending on what sort of system you're working for. The one that I'm going to use is balanced colour red blue. Okay, so at the moment it doesn't look any different, but if we animate the convergence, you can see it's splitting it up into two separate images essentially. So at this point here, I'm going to set a key for the convergence, and then I'm going to jump forward about a second and set this to be, say, 30. Notice how it splits it up into kind of these different colours. Quite crazy. And now what I want to do is I want the no logo line to be fully legible before it zooms in. So kind of around here, I'm going to set that back to 0. Click on the word to select all the keys and press F9 to easy ease. I'm just going to pull that keyframe back a little bit actually. So as that comes in, it splits apart, and then as the logo appears, it kind of all joins back up again. Cool stuff. Pretty simple, but it's quite a nice effect. As I say, I'm going to kind of prepare this as if it was going to be ready for output. It's all PAL at the moment, so if you work in NTSC or if you work in HD, etc., then obviously you'd use the appropriate settings. But for this, I'm just going to go into my comp settings, and I'm going to set this to be a PAL DVD1 widescreen, so it's 720 by 576 with a 1.42 pixel aspect ratio, so the whole thing's going to look squashed, but obviously when that plays out on a normal TV, it will look fine. Now the next thing I'm going to do is just add a box blur, set it to vertical, give it a radius of kind of 0.5 and 2 iterations. All this will do is it will kind of help reduce any flicker once you see it on a broadcast monitor. I think I told you that tip in the very first class actually. Now the other thing that we need to do is we need to check that the colours are all kind of broadcast safe. Now I know for a fact that these are not, and I've kind of planned the project like that on purpose. The reason I did that is because very often you'll be working in a situation and you may well be supplied graphics by another company or another operator or some 3D renders from the 3D department. Now these guys aren't necessarily going to be worrying about whether they've got safe colours or not. If you're outputting the final animation, then that's something that you do need to consider. Now really you should be checking this on a broadcast monitor, and to check the colours you should be using a vector scope, specifically a hardware scope as well. But obviously a lot of people out there don't have that. So how can we do this within After Effects? Well, luckily we've got Colour Finesse, which is a great effect from synthetic aperture. And it's really for grading and stuff like that, but it does have a vector scope, so you can use it to kind of check your colours and then also adjust them to bring them back into safe areas. So I'm going to just add that effect first of all, and we'll have a look at how we can fix this. So with the layer selected, go to the Effects menu, Synthetic Aperture, Colour Finesse. Now Colour Finesse has its own interface. You can access a lot of the parameters in here, but we're going to use their main full interface. So to access that, you just press this full interface button. So this is what it looks like when we first get into Colour Finesse. Unfortunately, I'm on a cinema display, and it's quite a bit bigger than the capture area, and I can't seem to resize it. But luckily, most of the information that we need is kind of visible here. So in this part here, we have kind of like some waveform monitors, vector scope, histograms, and over here we have a kind of clip of our timeline, or the layer on the timeline that we've applied the effect to. And then down here we have some parameters and controls, stuff like that. I'm not going to go through the ins and outs of using Colour Finesse, but I will briefly show you how to roughly use a vector scope and kind of correct these colours. One thing you can do is you can click in the preview window and you can actually drag, and it will kind of let you preview your animation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch to vector scope. So the way the vector scope works is it basically represents the kind of the saturation of the colour and also what hue it is. So as you travel around here, it changes hue. So you can see we've got red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, yellow. As you travel from the centre outwards, the colours get more saturated. So basically in the very centre there is absolutely no saturation, and right at the outside here is kind of maximum saturation. So you can see that we've got like points and some lines that correspond to the colours in our animation. You can see there's a line coming straight through cyan, etc, etc. Now, for colour to be safe, it really needs to be inside these boxes. So if you imagine drawing a virtual line from the centre, or from the outside of these boxes actually, from the outside around here, if you can get your colours within that area, then you're pretty much guaranteed that they're going to be safe. If we scrub through, you can see how this changes to update with the various clips that are showing in it. So there we go. You can see we've got a lot of colour information here, so it creates quite a mess. Whereas if we go later on here, there's very few kind of colours, so we just get these kind of really straight lines. When you adjust your colours to kind of make them safe, there's a few sort of, well, not really rules, but some tips that you can use. For instance, if you have a red that's kind of unsafe, if you desaturate that red, it will tend to go kind of pinky colour, which isn't necessarily what you want. So very often with reds, it's better to just reduce the brightness, just to get a slightly darker red. Whereas with things like yellows, if you reduce the brightness, you tend to get a brown colour. So with yellows, you're often better to kind of reduce the saturation. Now, I'm going to kind of use a combination of both of these, but these things are worth bearing in mind when you actually set up your project in the first place. You know, it's a bit late to be coming to it right at this point and correcting it. You should try and make sure your colours are as safe as possible from the onset. So I'm going to kind of set the saturation to be 90, and I'm going to set the brightness to be -10. Okay, you can see it's already pulled these colour values in, kind of going out slightly there, but we could probably live with that. Let's move along to a different point in time. Okay, so the green here is still coming in. It's kind of between the green and the cyan. It's coming out, slightly out of the safe area. Let's check the beginning. Yeah, I mean, it's all looking a lot better. I'm going to just take the saturation down to sort of 87, the brightness to kind of -12. Now if we scrub through, we should pretty much be safe all the way through. It's a little bit touch and go with this point here, but I think we're okay. So there we go, pretty simple overview of a vector scope. I hope you found that useful. Once we've done that, we can OK it, back to After Effects, and then we can see the effect that's had. If I just toggle the effect on and off, you can see that it's slightly dimming it all. Once that's displayed on a broadcast monitor, that will look absolutely fine. So that's the end of this class. The file's ready for output. I've done a render of it so we can have a quick look at it. This is the last class in the term, so really glad that you all kind of took part. Really enjoyed taking it. Thanks ever so much. Hopefully I'll be back again for another term. I know that I'll definitely be taking Cinema 4D next term, so it'd be good to see a few of you on that course as well. I do hope that you found it enjoyable and learnt some stuff along the way. The only thing that kind of felt was missing was didn't really work with much live action. The reason for that is just because it's so difficult to get licensing and stuff like that, and in the kind of context of broadcast design, we would have needed live action that was relevant to the projects that we were working on, maybe for next time. But hopefully everything else was good fun and you enjoyed it. I look forward to any feedback. Let's just have a look at the render I've just output and then call it a day. So here it is. It's anamorphic, so you'll have to just unstretch it with your eyes. So we pull through the glass logo in 3D that was generated in Cinema 4D. At this point we switched to kind of shape layers, added some stars in the background, transition into one of the other logos. Here we added some more shape layers to create the no logo line wipe on. Finally ended on kind of Cinema 4D render and having a look at how we can use various passes, in this example the ambient occlusion pass, to just help composite it into our After Effects environment. I'll just play it through again. So, thanks for taking the course. Maybe see you on the Cinema 4D course. Who knows what might happen in the future. Happy keyframing. Have a great one.